The Nexus Military Academy had a problem, and that problem wore regulation boots that somehow made the reinforced deck plating creak with each step. Probability of mission success under Earth standard conditions, 0.001%, announced Cadet Vex 9, her crystalline form refracting the harsh training bay lights into nervous rainbows across the walls. Margin of error? Negligible. Commander Thale's gaseous form rippled with what passed for exasperation among his species. 3 years running the Academy's advanced combat simulations had taught him that cadets who quoted statistics usually died first, but Vex 9 had a point. The Earth Protocol wasn't training. It was elaborate suicide with paperwork. "The statistical models are fascinating," Thale said, his voice emerging from a speaker embedded in his containment suit, "but irrelevant. High Command wants Earth-compatible operatives. We provide Earth-compatible operatives. The fact that none exist is apparently my problem to solve." The training bay stretched before them like a monument to cosmic sadism. Gravity generators hummed at settings that would crush most species' bone analogs. Climate controls cycled through weather patterns that violated several laws of physics and at least one peace treaty. The obstacle course looked like it had been designed by someone who fundamentally misunderstood the concept of survivability. "Sir," interrupted Cadet Yorick, whose 6 legs were already trembling at the mere sight of the 1G markers, "perhaps we could petition for a variance. My thoracic chambers aren't rated for this kind of atmospheric pressure." "Your thoracic chambers," Thale replied dryly, "are rated for hard vacuum and solar flare radiation. I somehow doubt Earth's laughably thin atmosphere will present a challenge." That was before the human consultant arrived. Lieutenant Kes Chen walked into the training bay like she owned it, which was impossible because ownership implied fear, and fear implied respect for the thing you owned. She displayed neither. Her regulation jacket hung open despite the bay's climate controls cycling through what the manual euphemistically called seasonal variance patterns. Currently, a charming simulation of Arctic tundra transitioning to tropical monsoon in the span of 6 minutes. "You must be Commander Thale," she said, extending a hand in the bizarre human ritual of voluntary physical contact. "Sorry I'm late. Had to finish my morning run." Vex 9's form flickered with computational overload. "You engaged in voluntary cardiovascular stress before beginning a maximum difficulty survival simulation?" "Habit," Chen replied, shrugging in a way that somehow managed to convey both apology and complete indifference. "Grew up in the Rockies. Dad always said if you weren't sweating before breakfast, you weren't awake yet." The assembled cadets exchanged the universal look of beings who had just realized their understanding of physics might be fundamentally flawed. Thale's gaseous form contracted, the nebuloid equivalent of a migraine. "Lieutenant," he began carefully, "you do understand what we're attempting here? This simulation replicates Earth's standard surface conditions. Gravity, atmosphere, weather patterns, biological hazards, everything our xenobiological analysis teams classified as Class X hostile environment factors." Chen looked around the bay with the expression of someone examining a particularly unremarkable conference room. "Oh, this is nice. Very clean. Is that actual water in the precipitation system? Or are you using substitutes?" "Actual water?" Thale replied, wondering if humans perhaps experienced reality differently than the rest of the galaxy. "Excellent. The synthetic stuff never feels right." Chen rolled her shoulders, producing a series of small popping sounds that made Cadet Yorick's 6 legs lock up entirely. "So what's the scenario? Survival-based? Combat? Search and rescue?" "All 3, Vex 9 said, her voice taking on the slightly mechanical tone she used when processing impossible datasets. "Sequential challenges designed to test adaptive capabilities under Earth-standard conditions. No cadet has ever completed the full sequence without requiring medical intervention. Huh? Chen studied the obstacle course with the mild interest of someone reading a dinner menu. What's your usual washout rate? 100%, Thale admitted, with an average casualty rate of 67% requiring back-to-tank therapy and 14% requiring complete neural rewiring. Chen nodded thoughtfully. That seems high. What part trips them up? The gravity, Yorick wheezed. The weather, added Cadet Zix, whose segmented exoskeleton was already showing stress fractures from the atmospheric pressure. The predator simulation protocols, whispered Cadet Moth, whose species had evolved on a world where the most dangerous life form was an aggressive fern. The psychological pressure of operating in a chaotic environment with no predictable patterns, concluded Vex 9. Chen listened to this litany of impossibilities with the patience of someone waiting for a slow elevator. And you've been trying to train non-humans for this? It was deemed more efficient than locating actual humans, Thale said. Your species has a regrettable tendency to either be unavailable for military service or to die in improbably heroic ways before we can recruit them properly. Fair point. We do have a bit of a martyrdom complex. Chen cracked her knuckles, producing sounds that made the assembled aliens question their understanding of bone density. Well, shall we get started? I have a staff meeting at 1400, and I'd hate to be late because I was busy not dying in your murder simulator. The casual way she described the Academy's most feared training protocol as a murder simulator, while simultaneously dismissing it as a minor scheduling inconvenience sent ripples of cognitive dissonance through every non-human mind present. Lieutenant, Thale said slowly, perhaps you don't fully comprehend the severity of— Oh, I get it, Chen interrupted, walking toward the course's starting line with the unhurried gait of someone heading to a picnic. Earth conditions, hostile environment, certain death for anyone not specifically adapted to survive in what you guys apparently consider a cosmic horror show. She paused at the activation console and looked back at them with a smile that somehow managed to be both reassuring and absolutely terrifying. Thing is, I'm from Colorado. This looks like a relaxing vacation compared to Tuesday morning in Denver. The simulation activated, and Lieutenant Kess Chen disappeared into what every military strategist in the galaxy had classified as certain death. The first scream came 30 seconds later. It wasn't Chen. The scream belonged to Cadet Yorick, whose nervous system had apparently short-circuited when the simulation's first predator emerged from what looked like perfectly innocent undergrowth. From the observation deck, Thale watched his crystalline Cadet Vex 9 recalculate probabilities so frantically that her refractive surfaces were creating a light show that could trigger seizures in 3 different species. Impossible, she muttered, mathematical symbols flickering across her translucent form. Human subject is experiencing cardiac acceleration, elevated stress hormones, increased oxygen consumption, all indicators of imminent system failure, yet motor functions remain optimal, neural coherence steady. This violates every biological model we have. On the screens below, Chen was having what appeared to be a pleasant conversation with something that looked like a cross between a grizzly bear and a food processor. The bear processor was not having a pleasant conversation back. What is she doing? Moth whispered, his compound eyes unable to track Chen's movements as she danced around claws that should have bisected her. I believe, Thale said slowly, she's explaining proper hiking etiquette to a territorial omnivore. Chen's voice drifted up through the audio pickups. Completely understand you're just protecting your cubs, but this is actually a designated trail, so technically we're both trespassing on Academy property. How about we compromise? I'll take the high path around your den, you don't eviscerate me, and we both pretend this never happened. The bear processor made a sound that registered on sensors as somewhere between a roar and a blender full of gravel. Right, that's fair. Counter-offer it is. What happened next required Vex 9 to add 17 new variables to her calculations and Thale to seriously consider early retirement. Chen didn't fight the creature. Fighting implied opposition. Instead, she treated it like an overly enthusiastic dance partner who happened to have titanium claws and a fundamental misunderstanding of personal space. She vaulted over a swipe that would have decapitated a Zephyrian, used the creature's own momentum to redirect its charge into a conveniently placed boulder, and somehow managed to end up sitting on its back with one arm wrapped around its throat in what looked disturbingly like a friendly embrace. "There we go," she said, slightly out of breath, but otherwise conversational. "See? Nobody had to die today. Well, except hypothetically me, but that was always a long shot anyway." The predator, apparently confused by prey that refused to behave like prey, settled into what could charitably be called a sulk. "Lieutenant," Thale's voice crackled through the comm system, "what exactly are you doing down there?" "Basic de-escalation techniques. This guy's just hangry and territorial. Probably hasn't eaten in a few days, based on the aggression patterns." Chen scratched behind what might have been the creature's ears, producing a sound like a contented chainsaw. "Back home, we call this Tuesday with the neighbors." Zix's exoskeleton creaked ominously. "Your neighbors are territorial predators with titanium-based claws?" "Well, the Johnsons are, but that's more of a property line dispute. Different situation entirely." The simulation shifted without warning, Earth's specialty according to the programming parameters. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in 30 seconds. Precipitation switched from tropical downpour to freezing sleet, and the lighting dimmed to simulate what human weather databases cheerfully labeled late afternoon in November. Every alien in the observation deck experienced the biological equivalent of a system crash. Their evolutionary programming screamed contradictory instructions: seek shelter, conserve energy, enter dormancy protocols, panic appropriately. The conflicting imperatives left them functionally paralyzed. Chen, meanwhile, zipped up her jacket and kept walking. "How?" Vex 9's voice had taken on the desperate edge of a mathematician watching 2 + 2 equal purple. "Temperature differential beyond sustainable limits. Atmospheric moisture content approaching saturation. Visibility reduced to suboptimal parameters. She should be entering hypothermic shock." "She's humming," Moth observed, with the hollow tone of someone questioning everything they'd ever believed about biology. She was. Some ancient human melody that seemed designed to mock the very concept of environmental hostility. The tune bounced off the artificial weather patterns like audio confirmation that physics had given up and gone home early. "Chen to base," her voice came through clearly, despite conditions that should have made communication impossible. "Quick question. Is this supposed to be challenging, or are you just testing equipment calibration?" Thale's gaseous form rippled with what his species considered deep philosophical confusion. "Lieutenant, you're currently experiencing conditions that would kill most sentient species in under 10 minutes. How are you not dead?" "Oh, this? This is nothing. Last winter in Aspen, we had a blizzard that—" Chen's explanation was interrupted by something that emerged from the simulated forest with too many teeth and not enough regard for the laws of physics. "Ah," she said, sounding pleased rather than terrified. "There's the real test." The creature was designated in Academy files as Specimen 7 Alpha, a synthesis of 12 different apex predators from various Deathworlds, enhanced with cybernetic improvements and programmed with hunting algorithms that had achieved a 100% fatality rate in previous simulations. Chen studied it with the clinical interest of someone examining a particularly interesting cloud formation. Pack Hunter, based on the vocalization patterns, cybernetic enhancements in the locomotion systems, probability matrix targeting for optimal strike placement. She tilted her head slightly. You know what? This actually reminds me of my neighbor's dog. Bigger teeth, more murder-oriented, but same basic energy. Specimen 7 Alpha launched itself at Chen with the calculated precision of a guided missile designed by committee to maximize trauma. Chen stepped aside, grabbed a fallen branch, and started playing fetch. The observation deck fell silent, except for the sound of Yorick's 6 legs giving up and depositing him on the floor in a heap of existential crisis. She's treating our ultimate predator simulation like a domestic companion animal, Thaela said, his voice carrying the hollow resignation of someone watching their fundamental understanding of reality pack its bags and leave without forwarding address. It's working, Vex 9 added, her mathematical certainty fractured beyond repair. The specimen is responding to play behavior protocols. This shouldn't be possible. Predators don't play with prey. It's definitionally contradictory. Chen, meanwhile, was having the time of her life teaching a bioengineered killing machine how to sit and stay. Good boy. Yes, you're a terrifying engine of destruction, but you're also a very good boy, aren't you? Specimen 7. Alpha's tail wagged. Its cybernetic targeting system was apparently having similar difficulties to Vex 9's probability matrices. The Academy's emergency protocols had never been designed for a scenario where the simulation subjects were having more fun than the observers. Thale watched his monitoring systems register readings that suggested either complete equipment failure or the presence of a being who operated according to physics principles unknown to galactic science. Then the real test began. Emergency klaxons wailed as the simulation's final phase activated. The temperature spiked to levels that would boil most organic compounds. The ground began shaking with seismic activity that registered somewhere between planetary upheaval and cosmic tantrum, and approximately 47 different things caught fire simultaneously. In the observation deck, 3 cadets immediately entered catatonic shock. Yorick's legs stopped working entirely. Vex 9's crystalline structure began developing stress fractures as her computational matrix tried to process environmental conditions that existed somewhere beyond the theoretical limits of survivability. This is it, Thale announced with the grim satisfaction of someone who had finally reached the bottom of a very deep hole. Full environmental collapse scenario, seismic instability, thermal spike, atmospheric toxicity, and structural failure protocols. The computer designation is Tuesday Morning in Hell. Chen's voice drifted up through the chaos, remarkably clear for someone who should have been reduced to component atoms 3 minutes ago. Huh. Feels like home during wildfire season. On the screens, she was picking her way through a landscape that looked like a collaboration between a volcano and a hurricane, with guest appearances by several natural disasters that didn't technically exist on any known world. She moved with the unhurried confidence of someone walking to the corner store, occasionally pausing to examine interesting geological formations or help extract simulated civilians from creatively dangerous predicaments. There's someone trapped under that collapsed structure, Moth observed, his compound eyes tracking movement that shouldn't have been possible given the ambient radiation levels. Multiple someones, Vex 9 corrected, her voice taking on the mechanical precision she used when reality stopped cooperating with mathematics. 17 distinct biosignatures. Extraction probability under current conditions. Mathematically negligible. Chen had apparently reached the same conclusion through different methods. She studied the wreckage for approximately 30 seconds, then began moving chunks of debris that the simulation had specifically calibrated to be immovable by anything short of industrial mining equipment. What is she using for leverage? Zix's exoskeleton was now producing stress sounds that registered on audio equipment. There's no mechanical advantage in her positioning. She's lifting through pure muscular force. Adrenaline, Chen's voice explained conversationally as she relocated what appeared to be half a building. Amazing what your body can do when your brain gets out of the way and stops overthinking the physics. The first survivor emerged from the wreckage, a holographic projection designed to test psychological responses to casualty situations. The program had given it realistic injuries, appropriate trauma responses, and a carefully calculated probability of survival that hovered somewhere around miracle territory. Chen took one look at the simulation and immediately began providing medical care that violated several principles of xenobiology. "Stay with me," she told the hologram, her hands working with practiced efficiency on injuries that would have sent most beings into shock, just from observation. "I know it hurts, but pain means your nervous system is still online. Pain is good. Pain means you're still fighting." The holographic casualty responded to this backwards logic with what appeared to be actual improvement. "She's treating pain as a positive indicator," Moth whispered. "This contradicts every medical protocol in the Galactic database." "It's working," Vex 9 added, her stress fractures spreading as she tried to process medical data that made no evolutionary sense. Patient stability increasing, survival probability rising. This should not be mathematically possible. Chen had moved on to the second casualty, then the third, maintaining a running commentary that sounded disturbingly like someone narrating a cooking show. "Right, so we've got a punctured lung here. Not ideal, but definitely manageable. The trick is maintaining pressure while restoring function. Back home, my cousin Danny got worse than this, falling off his motorcycle, and he was back to work the next day." "Your cousin survived a punctured lung and returned to normal activity within 24 hours. Thale's voice carried the hollow tone of someone whose understanding of biology had packed its bags and left without saying goodbye. "Well, he complained about it for 6 months, but yeah, humans are basically biological Swiss Army knives. We break in interesting ways, but we're really good at improvised repairs." The seismic activity intensified, opening fissures in the ground that would have swallowed small cities. Chen glanced at them with mild irritation, as if they were badly timed interruptions rather than geological apocalypse. "Right, extraction time. Everyone who can walk, help someone who can't. We're leaving before this gets actually dangerous." The word "actually" hung in the air like a challenge to physics itself. What followed could only be described as organized chaos, if organization could be applied to situations that existed beyond the normal parameters of possibility. Chen orchestrated an evacuation through conditions that should have been instantly lethal, treating environmental hazards like minor inconveniences and impossible obstacles like interesting puzzles. She carried 3 casualties simultaneously through a corridor filled with toxic gas, superheated air, and structural collapses that occurred with the precision of a demolition sequence. Her running commentary never stopped. "The gas isn't actually that bad if you hold your breath and move fast. The heat's worse, but it's dry heat, so it doesn't feel as awful as humidity. And the building collapse is just physics. You can predict where things are going to fall if you watch the stress patterns." 17 holographic casualties made it to the simulation's extraction point. According to the program's original parameters, the survival rate should have been 0. From the observation deck, Yorick managed one coherent sentence. She turned a mass casualty scenario into a field trip. Chen emerged from the simulation looking slightly disheveled but otherwise unharmed, brushing dust off her jacket like she'd just finished a mildly strenuous hike. "Not bad," she said. looking back at the devastation behind her. Though I have to say, your emergency scenarios could use some work. Nobody actually got hurt. The environmental hazards were pretty mild, and there wasn't nearly enough screaming. Next time, maybe add some actual stakes? The silence in the observation deck was the kind that usually preceded either enlightenment or complete psychological breakdown. Finally, Vex 9 spoke, her voice carrying the mechanical precision of a computer announcing system failure. Lieutenant Chen, what you just accomplished was impossible according to every biological, physical, and mathematical model in our databases. How do you account for this discrepancy? Chen considered the question with the same mild interest she'd shown everything else. I guess Earth just teaches you different math. Word traveled fast in a galaxy where instantaneous communication made gossip a competitive sport. By the time Chen had finished her post-simulation debriefing, the Academy's communication arrays were lighting up with priority requests from species she'd never heard of, and a few she was reasonably sure didn't exist. The first delegation arrived before she'd even changed out of her dust-covered uniform. Ambassador Krivak of the Hegemony Science Council announced a being that looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a filing cabinet and given it delusions of grandeur. We've come to study the aberrant human specimen. Chen looked up from her incident report, which she'd been filling out in triplicate because Academy bureaucracy apparently transcended species boundaries. I'm sorry. The what now? You, Krivak clarified, with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a particularly slow child. Our preliminary analysis indicates you possess biological modifications beyond current genetic engineering capabilities. We require tissue samples for analysis. Hard pass, Chen replied, returning to her paperwork. But thanks for visiting. The gift shop is down the hall if you want souvenirs. The ambassador's mantis-like features arranged themselves into what might have been confusion. You misunderstand. This is not a request. Galactic Science Directive 7. Alpha grants us authority to requisition biological samples from undocumented species modifications for the greater good of... Lieutenant? Thala's voice interrupted through the comm system, carrying undertones of what his species considered dark amusement. You have 17 more delegations requesting audience. Should I tell them you're busy being dissected for science? Chen sighed and looked at Krivak with the expression of someone who'd just realized their quiet day was about to become significantly less quiet. Let me guess. Everyone wants to figure out what makes humans tick. The galactic scientific community is naturally curious about beings who violate fundamental biological principles, Krivak replied stiffly. Right. Well, here's the thing about fundamental principles. Chen stood, stretching muscles that should have been shredded by the morning's activities. They're only fundamental until someone comes along who didn't get the memo. The next delegation had apparently been waiting in the corridor. Representatives from the Crystalline Confederacy, the Gas Giant Collective, the Hive Mind Consortium, and something that introduced itself as the Probability Mathematics Guild crowded into what had been a spacious briefing room and now felt like a very exclusive zoo exhibit. Impossible metabolic efficiency, declared the Confederacy's representative, a being whose entire body appeared to be made of animated mathematics. Contradictory psychological responses to stress stimuli, added the collective's ambassador, whose gaseous form was cycling through colors that probably meant something important. Non-standard neural processing of threat assessment data contributed the hive mind's spokesperson, who seemed to be having an argument with themselves. Chen listened to this litany of scientific befuddlement with the patient expression of someone waiting for a delayed train. You know what your problem is? You're overthinking this. The room fell silent with the kind of quiet that usually preceded either revelation or violence. Overthinking. Vex 9 had joined the crowd, her crystalline form still showing stress fractures from the morning's recalculations. We're attempting to understand biological processes that contradict established scientific principles. Exactly, Chen agreed cheerfully. You're trying to figure out how we work by comparing us to everyone else. That's like trying to understand jazz by analyzing elevator music. Please elaborate, requested the Probability Mathematics Guild's representative, whose form seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. Chen considered how to explain 4 billion years of evolutionary spite to beings who'd never had to question whether their next meal might try to eat them first. Earth doesn't play by anybody's rules. Never has. Our planet decided early on that consistent environmental conditions were for quitters, so it threw everything it could think of at whatever was unlucky enough to live there. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, magnetic pole reversals, weather that changes hourly, and predators that hunt in packs. She gestured toward the viewing screen that still showed the smoking remains of the simulation course. Your species evolved on worlds that made sense. Stable climates, predictable seasons, logical food chains. You developed intelligence to optimize efficiency in consistent environments. We developed intelligence to survive chaos. The hive mind's representative stopped arguing with themselves long enough to ask, and this accounts for your impossible capabilities? It accounts for us not thinking they're impossible. When your normal Tuesday includes dodging avalanches, outrunning forest fires, and convincing apex predators to leave you alone, nothing really seems that insurmountable anymore. Krivak's filing cabinet features clicked with what might have been comprehension dawning. You're saying humans aren't biologically aberrant. You're saying Earth is environmentally aberrant. Bingo. Class X Deathworld, according to your own classification system. Most species look at our homeworld and think, uninhabitable hellscape. We call it home, and complain when the weather gets boring. The silence stretched until Thala's voice crackled through the comm system. Lieutenant, I'm receiving a priority communication from High Command. They want to discuss your next assignment. Chen raised an eyebrow. Already? I just finished this one. Apparently, word has reached the upper echelons about today's demonstration. They have what they're calling a unique opportunity for someone with your qualifications. The assembled aliens exchanged glances that somehow managed to convey both fascination and terror. What kind of opportunity? Chen asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer wouldn't involve desk work. Training assignment. New colony world that's been having some settling difficulties. The initial survey classified it as habitable, but the colonists keep requesting evacuation due to impossibly hostile conditions. Chen's expression shifted to something that made every non-human in the room take an involuntary step backward. It was the look of someone who'd just been told Christmas was coming early. What kind of hostile conditions? Variable gravity, unpredictable weather patterns, aggressive native wildlife, seismic instability, and atmospheric chemistry that changes with the seasons. Chen's smile could have powered a small starship. So, basically Tuesday in Colorado with more interesting neighbors? The colony designation is New Geneva. They're requesting a specialist in impossible environment adaptation. I'll take it. As the delegations filed out, still muttering about biological impossibilities and classification paradoxes, Vex 9 lingered behind. Lieutenant, she said, her mathematical certainty finally achieving something resembling stability. I believe I understand now. Earth didn't break your species. It forged you into something the galaxy didn't know it needed. Chen nodded, already mentally packing for her next assignment. Funny thing about that, we never applied to join galactic civilization. You guys came looking for us. Because normal doesn't solve the impossible problems. Exactly. Chen gathered her paperwork and headed for the door. Besides, impossible is just another word for Tuesday. Behind her, the simulation bay's monitors still displayed the aftermath of conditions that should have been unsurvivable, solved by methods that shouldn't have worked, by a being who shouldn't have existed. The galaxy, it seemed, was finally learning what Earth had known all along. Sometimes the best solution to an impossible problem was someone who'd never been told it was impossible in the first place.